Okay, yeah, my name is Raj. Thank you very much for the presentation. I've been very intrigued by this concept of self-management for a while. I'm in the business school, and I've been hearing this term quite a bit in the last about year, I would say. I was really hoping to get greater clarity on exactly what self-management is and how it's different from traditional management, if there's such a thing as traditional management. But I got a kind of a very fuzzy idea. So if you think about all the words that were used here, like transparency and justice, non-coercion, commitment, I'm pretty sure that a lot of traditional firms would say that we vouch for those. We want those. And I don't see them as kind of differentiating points. But I was just wondering about one specific aspect of how goals get achieved. If you think about even your own goals, you set up a goal, and then you try and implement those like sub-goals or behaviors that you think will help you achieve those goals. Then you have to step back and assess, okay, how far did I go, and what's the gap, what do I need to do now, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, you play the role of a worker and a boss, even within yourself when you're trying to achieve a goal. And if you were to externalize that to an organization, you should have somebody who's like overseeing, has a bird's eye picture of what's going on, and somebody who's doing the kind of caught in the weeds and doing the work. And therefore, I really can't see how you can escape that. So don't you need somebody? I mean, you called it leadership teams. If that's not a hierarchy, then what is a hierarchy? So I'm just confused about this whole thing.
As I said, it's very counterintuitive. I mean, it's really, you hear the words and you go, what the hell are these guys are talking about? By the way, what do you do? What's your role again?
I'm a professor at the Macomb School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. Okay. I'm the marketing department, not management, but I'm very interested in this concept.
Okay. And you have a boss?
I have, well, we have the dean and the chair and all that, but we are pretty decentralized. I mean, very little, like I floated a course on happiness from the marketing department in a business school, and it got approved. And so there's transparency, I believe, there is openness to innovation and ideas. And I don't know how a self-managing team would have arrived at a different conclusion as far as this course is concerned. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So when you came up with this idea for the course, did somebody tell you what to do? Or?
No, so what happened is I floated the idea, I brought it up to the chair, and he said, look, if the students demand it, who am I to stop you? So why don't you go ahead and put the syllabus together? We'll take it up to the dean's office, we'll see what they say, and the dean's office said the same thing.
That was pretty much a self-managed process. I could see where you're having trouble saying, how is that different?
Well, the first part of your question was you didn't quite detect the difference between self-management and management in the discussion. And for me, it's very, very simple. There's management of yourself and there's management of others. And when you completely abandon command authority, when there is zero command authority, where no one has any ability to tell anyone else what to do, that's self-management. People are managing themselves by definition.
I have a quick clarification on that too. So when you say no command authority, there's always an intention to persuade another person to do what you think is right. Without that intention to persuade, you wouldn't have any teams. And where do you draw the line between coercion and the desire to persuade? You know, so it doesn't go back to where you're operating from, that only you know, that others can't figure out if you're trying to persuade or you're trying to coerce?
I would recommend you read a guy named Fernando Flores. Fernando Flores is the father of commitment as speech act. And he has done marvelous research into the structure and the life cycle and the reality of commitment making and commitment keeping. And commitments are speech acts that are essentially prompts for action. But there's a difference between a request and telling someone what to do. That's the cut point.
We're going to move on. Hello, I'm Rosemary Strunk. I'm with a company named Living Courageously. We do coaching and consulting around the U.S. I'm particularly interested I have a passion for strength-based communication, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and purposefulness. So it lends itself to the base for which these companies and our interaction could be mindful, positive, and not using the command. control thing. I've really come to that over the years of having a lot of command and control experiences, and then cultivated all of this through my really personal development and then bring it back into a company. So I'm particularly interested what supports or development activities that you're doing that help people learn about emotional intelligence, about, well, what is it to self-manage it? What is it to be accountable versus blaming and looking to external sources for all the reasons why I'm not maybe being successful? Because I think a portion of our education or a good portion of our culture is based on command and control. So it's going to be supporting people to learn new skills.
You made a very good point that our education, in fact, everything we know is command and control. So at home, who runs the home? Your mom, right? Your dad thinks he runs the home. Your mom runs the home. And then you get to school and same thing. You go to work and same thing. That's why I'm hopeful that as companies start breaking that down and changing the model, if you will, that'll teach people how to do their own thing. As far as emotional intelligence and blaming other people, that doesn't go away. That's just human nature. The thing is, how do you train everybody to deal with that kind of thing and be able to speak up and not be afraid that they may be carrying a big gun? About 2 weeks ago, I was having a video conference with somebody, and I thought I was being, enthusiastic about something. And one of the young women there said, "Matt, you're yelling at me." I said, "Oh, okay, I'll lower my voice." But I repeated myself at a lower tone. And she said, "You're still yelling at me." I go, "What do you mean?" She says, and she explained why she felt it. Okay. To me, she's money in the bank, right? That she was able to tell me this thing. If I had been the boss, if I had been carrying the big guns, I don't know if she would have done that.
Yeah, part of the reason for having self-management in the first place is to provide checks and balances on human biological impulses to exercise authority over others. Ian Robertson wrote a book called The Winner Effect, How Power Affects the Brain, and he learned that when people exercise command authority over others, they get a shot of dopamine in the brain, they become literally addicted to power. And so if you don't have the power, maybe you're addicted to it, but it's going to be really frustrating for you because you can't tell people what to do. So it forces you to get good and better as a leader. And emotional intelligence is going to be really important. There's going to be a huge market for emotional intelligence training, education, coaching, and development as organizations become more self-managed, because people have to get good at this stuff to be effective. There's a startup in Silicon Valley now, the people-centric organization, that is looking at how do we embed emotional intelligence facilitators permanently in teams so they can strengthen the intelligence of individuals and teams and allow them to scale and grow. And this is a topic of real interest to companies that I've seen.
Thank you. Adam has 2 questions on this side of the room, and then we're going to come in the back, and we hope to get all your questions, so please hang in there.
I'm Sarah Morris, and I'm with PAJ. My question mostly is towards Dan. I was just thinking about the hiring and the firing. It sounds like, Matt, you have a leadership team that takes care of that. But how do you determine when another employee is needed, or if something is going on that an employee is creating a toxic environment? I mean, what do you do with the situations like that?
Right. So and we call people colleagues, not employees. Employee has a command and control connotation. It means someone who works for another person for pay. That's the literal definition of employee. So we think of professional colleagues, and every professional colleague in the Morningstar self-managed environment has an affirmative obligation to identify the need for additional talent and initiate the acquisition of talent, or to identify the need to ask someone to leave. And everything is accomplished through request and response, because no one can tell anybody what to do or can fire anyone. So if I detect a need for someone to leave the system based on integrity or performance or some combination, I ask them to leave. Now that person may agree with my request, and they may leave, and in which case we're done. If the person disagrees, I invoke a process called gaining agreement, and we bring in a third-party mediator, and that person sits with us, and here's my request, and tries to help us resolve our difference of opinion. If we are successful, we're done. If not, we bring in a panel of mediators and try to resolve it. If we're successful, we're done. If not, then it goes to binding arbitration because it has to end somewhere.
For the next question, go ahead.
Let me, a real quick answer to your question. We have a similar thing where people ask other people to leave, and then it goes, if it doesn't work one-on-one, then it's the team. We've had cases where people have been asked to leave one team, is accepted by another team, and it works over there. Because sometimes it's just personality and things like that.
So I'm Stuart Levine. This is a question for both of you, and then a question for Doug. The question for both of you, which is kind of a follow-up, what are the criteria for both hiring and having people leave? I hear the process, I get that completely, but what are some of the criteria that's used? And then the second question, and this is for Doug, what's the content of the peer agreements? What are the elements of those peer agreements?
In our case, every group gets a budget, so recruiting gets a budget, et cetera, and the teams get a budget, and they manage it. If they need somebody, then they hire somebody. And in our case, it's fairly simple. We need somebody that knows PHP and et cetera, et cetera. That's as far as the hiring requirements. The firing thing, if you will, is up to the team. If the team finds that somebody's dragging them down, then they'll talk to that person. If somebody's upsetting somebody else on a regular basis, they'll talk. At least that's what's supposed to happen.
So I hear dragging down and upsetting the team,
Right.
aside from the technical requirements.
Right.
Okay. Great.
Well, the technical and the morale requirements.
So the criteria for initiating the acquisition of talent, this is based on need. I mean, if we add double the horsepower in a plant, we're going to need another electrician. So somebody is going to detect that, and they're going to talk to someone that has some experience in approaching the talent market, and they're going to put together a job description, find some candidates, and then the people that make the hiring decision on a new electrician are the electricians, because nobody cares more about who joins a team than the people who will be potentially working with that person for the next decade.
So it's somebody who fits the culture.
Yeah, and they spend a lot of time. In an interview to hire an electrician, they'll spend like 10 minutes on the technical competence. They'll spend 3 hours on self-management competency and fit. And criteria for firing, it's basically for reasons of performance or integrity or both. Just ask them to leave. The elements of the peer agreement or the colleague letter of understanding are really simple. First, we ask people to identify a personal commercial mission that answers 3 questions. Number 1, why are you here? What is your purpose in coming to work here every day? Secondly, how does what you do support the overall mission of the enterprise? And thirdly, what does excellence look like in your particular role in this company? Come up with a personal commercial mission, then we want you to identify the specific processes for which you agree to be accountable. What do you do? So the mission is the why, the processes are the what. What is your specific portfolio of process accountabilities? Then we ask people to identify the scope and quantum of their decision-making authority for each of those processes. What are your decision rights? Are you the decision maker for a given process? Are you merely making recommendations to another decision maker for that process? Are you the decision maker but require input from others prior to making the decision for that process? Do you just make decisions when someone else is on vacation? What is it? We want you to be really clear, and Matt was great about emphasizing transparency. We want clarity and transparency and accountability all across the board. And then how do you know if you're doing a good job? So we want you to identify KPIs. What are your performance metrics and measures? How do you know if you're doing a good job on a given process? And we never benchmark other companies or other industries or sectors. We benchmark perfection. So perfection in an efficiency metric is 100%. Perfection in a cost metric is 0. The reason we benchmark perfection is because it liberates innovation. When people are thinking how to be perfect, it creates all kinds of interesting, innovative ideas. So we publish these transparently across the enterprise online. We try to use two-dimensional line graphs showing trends, and we expect these to trigger conversations. Are the trends bending toward perfection or away? And if so, if they're bending away, how can we help you turn it around?
Well, you like this self-management concept. I see the movement happening. But on the other hand, there's a big counter trend that is happening in the country as well. You made the analogy that in most of our lives, nobody tells us what color to paint our house, and nobody tells us, so we are self-managing. But when I look around, I see millions of us doing a horrible job of self-managing. These seem to be two trends, because I really agree that on the bleeding edge of the knowledge economy, et cetera, we're moving towards more and more autonomy, more and more people being able to manage themselves. On the other side of the equation, we seem to be going in exactly the opposite direction. So anyway, I'd like to get some feedback from you about this. Thanks.
Okay, next question. Look, what you're describing is human nature, right? People are going to be fat and skinny or whatever they think. But the thing is, that's their choices, that's their decision. And people looking for the strong man to come tell me what to do, yeah, that's always been there also. That's the easy way out. How do you counter that? I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that. So I don't know. I don't have much of an answer for you. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, when people ask about command authority to me it's a binary condition. You either have it or you don't. I either have authority to tell you what to do or I don't. So we have to decide in any given environment, workplace, township, local government, country, whatever it happens to be, we have to decide what's it going to be. Is it going to be command and control, or is it going to be free will? It's one or the other.
One more thing. Let me. Microphone. Microphone.
Too many of us want the freedom without the accountability, was his comment.
Actually, that's not true. That is just not true. Is given the conditions, given that, for example, work, the balance, the life-work balance thing. Yeah, when work is horrible and you're doing stuff that people are telling you to do and you don't like what you're doing, then that's like being dead. People may look like they're alive, but they're zombies. They're like being dead. What we're talking about is an integrated life, living a full life. Once we get to that point, or closer to that point, not even all the way there, then a lot of things change. Okay, in answer to your previous question, I happen to be from Cuba, okay? I know what having a strong man to tell you what to do, what not to do, when to do it, how to do it. I know what that feels and looks like, and I don't want any part of that, okay? So I know that's not the answer that you're looking for, but I know exactly what I don't want, which is that, okay? I think we're in the right path now. What we need to do is make things better.
We have time for only a couple of questions.
Okay, so first off, fantastic presentations on both your part. Very inspirational. Thank you. Second of all, so my name's Darren Martin. I'm an author, speaker. I wrote a book called The Company of Owners, 29% engagement at your typical U.S. company. When I ask for a show of hands, people, what's the engagement? They'll say 5%, 10%, ridiculous. I wrote another book called Beached Whale, Learning to Swim in the New Ocean, about beached whale companies, which was born out of experience being in and out of maybe a large defense contractor and some other places. The first indicator of your beached whale, by the way, is if there's a Dilbert cartoon on every cubicle, because they're trying to tell you something. Well, you're talking about organisms versus organizations. It's so far superior a model. And by the way, even prior to our technology and so forth, it always has been. Why is it taking corporate America so long to figure out? You know, we say if it isn't broke, don't fix it. It's clearly broken. Where do you think the resistance points are? Where do you see the tipping point where companies that do what y'all are talking about really just start to separate from the pack, as it sounds like they're already doing? But when does that other structure begin to really just dissipate and go away?
I think we're starting to see it happen before our eyes. When you look at Hire Group had their conference 2 weeks ago, there were executives from all around the world. There were 2,000 people there to learn what they are doing and take that back to their home countries and their companies. Where the exact tipping point is, I don't know, but there is something churning right now in the zeitgeist, and it's happening fast, and it's global. It's Russia, it's China, it's Europe, it's South America, it's India. It's all across the U.S. and Mexico, Canada. It's everywhere. And you know, I believe in the next 10 years we'll have some big companies make a total transformation. And once that happens, then you'll see lots more climb on board.
I saw a similar thing happen in software development. It used to be very top-down, what's called the waterfall model, right? And then in 2001 or 2, people started talking about Agile. And we adopted it, and a few other companies adopted it. Now, you sound ridiculous if you're not doing Agile, right? And when that happened, I really didn't notice, but it took over the world. So you give people a good thing, and they'll bite and they'll do it. The problem is, you said the system is broken. A lot of people don't see that, don't see the system as broken, right? The Mercers and the Cox of this world don't see the system as broken. It's working for them. So why change it? But it's the generational thing. It's going to happen. I mean, you're going to die, your kids are going to take over, and your kids want a different world. So, well, I'm going to die too.
Hi, I'm Emily Wolf, and I work with Health Enhancement Research Organization. And I'm also, prior to that, clinical social worker, so I have different hats on in my background. But I'm wondering about your experience or understanding of how this model works in different cultural contexts, whether it be, you know, cultural as in where do you come from in the world, cultural as in your socioeconomic background and upbringing, because it seems that those could definitely play a large part in somebody's ability to thrive in this environment or even come in understanding it. I hope that makes sense.
Well, using the reference point of Morningstar, the bulk of the workforce is seasonal. The bulk of the seasonal workforce works for basically the minimum wage. They are some of the most enthusiastic, engaged supporters of self-management I've ever seen. And I mentioned, you know, we've had years where the return rate was 100%, where they've been laid off for 8.5 months. When I measured it, it trended around 90 to 91%. That's pretty high. Most companies would like a retention rate of that in their year-round workforce, much less a seasonal workforce. So don't see any difference in socioeconomic background making a difference in engagement or embracing self-management whatsoever. In fact, maybe the seasonal workforce might be even more engaged than the year-round workforce. So I just don't see a difference.
There's a book called Peak by Chip Conley, and he talks about it. This was done, he did this in the hospitality space. So these are people that change your bed and clean bathtubs and barely speak English, and still they loved it and went into it. In 1958, W. L. Gore did the exact same thing, in fact more radical than anything I've seen, with people that work in factories and, you know, with chemicals and dangerous things. In 1928, the John Lewis Foundation did the same thing, even more radical, in the UK, with retail people and stuff like that. So the thing is, we're so used to normal, we're so used to the up and down thing, that it's really hard to see how you escape it. It really is. And that's why I'm blessed that I had the chance to kind of fall into it. It's not like I sat down one day and went, okay, let's do the self-management thing. I read his book. No. It wasn't like that. It was more of, we tried things because we wanted it for ourselves and saw how people reacted. So I don't think there's any limit other than what's normal today.
Thank you. My name is Shivani, and I run a company called Theory of Purpose. Firstly, I wanted to thank you both, because I think the one word that I am taking back from both of your presentations is courage. The courage to be able to dream and dare to do things differently. Question, actually, to keep it very short, as I promised, is you have economies and cultures like Bhutan, which talk about gross national happiness as an organizational practice for well-being and happiness. But we also, on the other hand, have a lot of innovation coming out from very structured environments like Japan, for example, which has traditionally been looking up at hierarchy from whether it's age, its designation, etc. So I think both of you are at one end of the spectrum in terms of the kind of courage you've demonstrated, and you have seen the results. But then we also have successful outcomes from the other end of the spectrum. So what is that one message you would give anybody who's wanting to attempt to move from this end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum?
I would encourage them to experiment and try a pilot and test it and see how it works in your environment, your culture. And if it gives you some benefits that are replicable, that you can scale across a larger cross-section of the enterprise, then great. And if it doesn't work for you, then keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, the same thing, experiment. Be willing to be the frog, as well as the mad scientist. So.
I really appreciate you, your interest in this first session. You have that opportunity to come and ask your questions, circle around the speakers, and okay. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.